All right, so we're going to talk about layers today. And I wanted to go back over kind of those last few modification commands, if they weren't making sense. Does anybody have any questions on modification commands, meaning move, copy, or offset? Or do they seem to make pretty good sense? Don't be shy.
I would just like to review them, just because I tried copying last time and I just couldn't quite do it.
Okay, yep, let's do it then. Good. All right, so let's open up, something on CAD Common. I'm going to go to this PC, and we're going to go to CAD Common here, click, and let's go to Arch and 1310, Drawings, and let's open up arc, circle, ellipse again. Okay. All right. Okay, so last time we talked about lines, right? And I'll just run through in just a couple minutes, how we're going to work with lines, right? So we can initiate the line command up here in the ribbon. We can initiate it down here at the command line by clicking and typing in line, enter. We can also just type L, enter, and that would initiate the line command. I don't know if you guys realize this, and I don't think I have it in my book, but in the newer version of your AutoCAD course manual, there is, oh, nope, maybe not in mine. I'm pretty sure in your version of the course booklet, right, this one in the PDF, that there's a shortcut, there's a keyboard shortcut list. Actually, maybe it's in the front of the book. Let's see. Mine is page 123. 1-23. So it's command aliases and shorthand. So if you're ever wondering what, one of the shortcuts for a command is, you can look it up here. Now, it's all very nice and well that we have that, although in the newer versions of AutoCAD, my book is several years old, when you type L, for example, we get a predictive text that says, hey, it could be LT scale, list, length, LI for line, right? And you can sort of pick from the list of items. We didn't used to have this in AutoCAD, so, a lot of times, and I was guilty of this too, you think, well, I know what that command is, I just can't think of the keyboard input, right? I know I need to change my LT scale or whatever, but I can't remember the input that I need to, put at the command line. And so that's actually pretty helpful. But it's kind of made this whole worksheet in the book a little bit useless, because now the predictive text will tell you, oh, hey, here's a list of commands that, start with L, and you can figure it out usually. But any of our commands, whether they're drawing or modification, we can initiate them using an icon, typing it at the command line. If you have dynamic input turned on, when you start typing, it will start typing at your cursor. That's another way of inputting at the command line, is using dynamic input, okay? And then, I don't know if anybody really does this, but if you come up here to the drop-down menu, we have all of our drawing commands here. And under modify, we have all of our modification commands here, right? Now again, there's no right or wrong way to initiate a command. So if you like the ribbon and the icons, great. If you like the menus, great. If you like typing, great, right? And I'm one who I type, right? So you'll see me typing things in all the time. So line, we initiate the command. The basic way that we start the line, you could enter a coordinate, right? XY coordinate if you wanted, which usually when you're drawing just floor plans, elevations, architectural things, we're not going to do that, right? We're going to use the direct entry method, where we click, move in the direction we want to go, and we enter a dimension, right? 10 foot, enter, okay? Now, you can use some of the drawing aids down here to help you with that. We can turn ortho, click on. Ortho helps us draw straight lines, okay? That just reminded me, do you all realize there's a quiz, right, that's on Canvas that you need to do by the end of the week, right? Hint, maybe that was one of the questions on the quiz that just reminded me. So don't forget, I changed the due dates. I know on the syllabus it says that the quizzes are due Friday, but I changed it to Sunday night, because if it were me, I'd probably want the weekend to do it, right? So just make sure that you get them done this weekend, okay? So we can have use some of our drawing aids to help us draw these, right? So we have ortho, we have our object snaps that help us draw lines, right? By being allowed to place our lines at certain points, right? On these lines, that helps us draw, right? There's my endpoint, there's my endpoint. There's a midpoint right there. You guys get the idea. Okay. So line, initiate the command, click, point in the direction you want to go and enter a dimension. Okay. Circles, we talked about circles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the basic premise is you click on whatever circle type you want to use. I would say generally speaking, 99% of the time you're going to use one of these top two options, right? Center radius or center diameter. Okay. You click the one you want, you click the center point, and then you click the dimension of the diameter or the radius, either one. Let's see, arcs, my nemesis, the arc. So we have a bunch of different arcs, right? And again, you know, I don't use all of these arcs. I tend to stay away from 3-point because I feel like out of all of the arcs, it's maybe the least accurate for me. But the premise is somewhat similar to a circle where we have a start, we have a center, and we have an endpoint. Okay, so we have a start, click, we have a center, click, and we have an endpoint, click, and we can create arcs. Okay, these are all, we went over these last time. Yep.
So the start, basically the start position, like in this case, is always for the midpoint.
No, so the start, that's a good, well, let's clarify that. So the start, right, so if we were to look at this application of an arc, right, the start point is determined by the size of the object you're drawing. And basically it's going to be the radius of the object you're drawing, right? So if I have a wall here, like on the screen, and then I have my 3-foot gap, and then I have another wall over here, right? And the gap is 3 feet right here, and I have a door panel that's gonna, you know, essentially live in this little space forever, right? When I'm creating an arc, right, I've got my circle, and I'm visualizing this. I'm not actually drawing a circle. I have the midpoint of my circle right there. And when I'm drawing an arc, the center of the arc is going to be the center of the circle that generates that arc, okay? And the way that it works is the start point is essentially going to be this distance right here. So if this were 4 feet, the start, and this were the center of the arc, the start point would be whatever distance, you know, this is from the center, and it's usually a radius, right? So if this door is 4 feet, then this start point will be 4 feet away from that center point. And if this space is 3 feet, then the start point is going to be 3 feet away from that center point, right? And that center point corresponds with the center point of the circle that generates it. Does that somewhat make sense? A little bit. When you start using the arc to draw, it's going to make a little bit more sense as to how it works, because usually when you're creating an arc, it's in this application like you're doing a door swing, right? So you have a definition of where the center of the circle is, where the start point is, which is that radius, and then where it's going to end. So you're not just kind of drawing in space hoping you get it the right size. You're kind of filling in a gap, and those points are defined. Make a little bit of sense? Okay. So with, whoops, come tight here. So with the arc, you know, I click on my arc, and I'll do a start, center, end. The start point is going to be however, you know, far away from the center I need to be, right? So this, in this case, this is my center. I need to be 3 feet away because that's how wide my door is. So start, click. The center is the center of the circle that generates this arc. Click. And then end is where I want that arc to end. Click. Okay. And all of these different arcs are different renditions of this, right? Start, center, angle. So instead of clicking an endpoint, I'm going to enter an angle, 45, 30, and the arc will stop at that angle. So let me just do that real quick. Right, start, center, angle. So the start point is the radius from the center that I need to create. Start, click. Center of the circle that the arc is generated from, click. And the angle, right, would be, I could type in 45 degrees. And it creates a an arc that stops at 45 degrees, right? If I typed in 90, the arc would have gone all the way up to here, right? If I had typed 180, it would have gone all the way down to there. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Because you did it that way with the 45,
Uh-huh.
is it stuck at 45, or could you click on that and like drag it up to the 90?
It is not stuck at 45. So we have here what are called grips, and I can grab that end grip by clicking on it, and I can drag it up here, and I can click on it up there and continue it.
So I'm not seeing that on mine.
Seeing
Is
what?
that only after, is that only while you're in the command?
Hit escape, 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 clear out. Now click on your arc. There they are. Yep. Yep. Now here's the thing, when you're finding this out, when you grab this, the integrity of that arc is not always maintained, right? So I can grab this endpoint and go like that, and it very clearly is not like, it doesn't have a 3-foot diameter or a radius anymore, right? It's skewed. So it doesn't always work out every time that you can just drag it up very nicely and make it, you know, look right. But in this case, it worked out really well. Yeah. Which is one of my pet peeves with arc.
Is there like a way to lock it or anything?
You can,
So that it's locked on that distance,
do you mean,
like that radius?
no, not really. No. No, so, well, I could lock my, well, we'll talk about layers today. I can make it so this whole piece of geometry is locked down and uneditable, right? So it doesn't go anywhere. But I can't tell that arc, you have to stay at 90 degrees, right? I can lock down the layer so it will be editable, but I can't define anything in that piece of geometry. You're thinking of,
That seems like you'd be able to mess that up pretty easily.
Right.
Just accidental click and all of a sudden your door
is slightly off. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could take this and I could even scooch it in just the tiniest bit, and it still looks pretty accurate. You know, I can look at it and say, I know that's wrong, right? But it still looks semi-accurate where most people wouldn't be able to tell, right? But if you needed this CAD file to manufacture that door or cut something out using it, it would be off, right? And with drawing a circle, I can definitely see that, right? Yeah. Yeah, I've said a lot, right? I don't like it. All right. So lines, circles, arcs, rectangles, right? We have the rectangle command up here where I click on rectangle, I click on my first point, I click on my second point, there's my rectangle, right? That's a non-dimensional rectangle where I just create it visually, right? I can click on rectangle, click. Rectangles are polygons, right? We don't usually call them a polygon, but they are. Click. And if I want to create a dimensional rectangle, meaning, or square where it's, 3 foot by 3 foot, something like that, I can come down here and I can click on, to the command line, I can click on dimension. Or I could type D, enter. And it says, hey, specify the length for the rectangle. Well, let's do 36 inches, enter. What is the width? 12 inches, enter. And I'm almost done. I've got the size of it created or defined. Now I just need to sort of place it in model space. So as I move my mouse around kind of in a pretend circle, I can see that it will allow me to click and place it in whatever quadrant of the system it wants to live in. The final way, and this is this is probably the most used case of relative coordinates that I use. So when I'm drawing, and I'm drawing rectangles specifically, I use a coordinate system actually quite frequently, right? And I use it quite frequently because, we'll say back in the day, right, before we had the option to, let me start the rectangle command. Before we had the option to come down here and choose dimensions, the only way that you could define a rectangle was using a relative coordinate where you type at 24, 24, enter, right? And from that first point where I clicked, I have a 24-inch by 24-inch square that has been created, right? So that's one case of a relative input that we'll use in a drawing, drawing here.
So that at just does the same thing as clicking on the dimension?
Basically, yeah. The input is just different, right?
Yeah.
You're inputting an ordered pair instead of 24, enter, 24, enter. Yeah. All right, so we have rectangle. Let's see. We have move, copy, and offset. We'll use those three for right now. And I want to go over polygons, right? I think maybe we'll spend a little bit more time on our geometry today. And I'm going to introduce the idea of layers and just continue it on Monday. I think that'll, spanning 2 classes, will work out nicely. But let's look at polygons. And I'll just be honest with you, I very rarely use polygons. You know, drawing professionally, very rarely are you drawing triangles, or, you know, unless you're drawing a detail of a parking sign or something, you know, very rarely are you using anything other than a rectangle or a square as far as polygons go. We're not drawing rectangles or hexagons or, you know, a lot of things like that. But I guess if you are using this in terms of engineering, where maybe you're a mechanical engineer and you're developing, you know, widgets or whatever, and you're trying to draw them and they need to have a hexagon, you know, bolt that's shaped like a hexagon, that would be pretty useful for you, right? Or if you're 3D printing something and you want it to be an octagon, then that would be pretty useful for you, right? So in an architectural setting, you're not necessarily using the polygons very much. I don't use them very much, right? But maybe in the engineering realm, you're going to be using them a little bit more, right? Or product design, if you're going into product design, okay? So let's look at polygons. The polygon command is nested in the rectangle command here. If I use this little drop down, there's my polygon, okay? There's two types of polygons. There's a inscribed polygon and a circumscribed polygon, right? So, and I think they give a pretty good visual little video if I hover in it long enough. The one on the left, right, is an inscribed polygon, where the polygon is generated based on the fact that it's drawn on the inside of a circle, okay? And a circumscribed polygon is one that is based on the fact that, or based on the idea that you draw it around the outside of a circle. So that's the difference between the two different types of polygons, inscribed and circumscribed, okay? Well, that's the thing. You know, again, I don't really, with this application, your object is going to be dimensional, right? So why do I care necessarily if it's dimensional and it's drawn on the outside of a circle as opposed to the inside? Because you can draw them to any precise, you know, size that you want them to be. So in my mind, it doesn't really matter. So I just hit enter to pick the default one, so I don't have to enter another command, right? So I'm going to choose, I'm just going to hit polygon, and you know, I immediately don't necessarily know what to do next, so I come and look at the command line, right? The command line is always going to lead you through commands. So if I forget something, I initiate a command and then I forget the next step, always go down here to the command line, right? If you have dynamic input turned on, then here at your cursor, you'll get that same prompt. Well, how many sides would you like with your polygon? Well, let's do 3. Enter. That's a triangle, right? Specify the center point. Okay, well, the center point can just be clicked in space. I could snap to something like an endpoint, right? Or a midpoint to generate my polygon. I'm just going to click in space, and it's going to ask me if I would like this to be inscribed or circumscribed. And for us right now, unless you're specifically asked by someone to do it a certain way, I don't think it matters as long as you have a dimensional object, right? It's the right size, that's all that matters. So we'll just use inscribed, click. Specify the radius, okay? So they're using the terminology of a circle to help generate it, right? But again, you can draw these to any dimension and they're fine. So let's type 24. And just to remind you, the inch is the default unit in AutoCAD. So when I type 24 and I hit enter, what is that? It's 24 inches, yeah, exactly, 2 feet, yep. Enter. Okay, so there's my cute little triangle. Okay, let's do another polygon here. Let's do an octagon. So number of sides, we'll do 8. Enter. Specify the center. You know, if I wanted to center this octagon in the center of this square, you remember we have kind of that object tracking that happens here, where I can touch, move, I can touch lightly and move this direction, right? So I can get that midpoint without having to draw anything. Click, and let's do it inscribed, and we'll give it a dimension. I could type in a dimension. Let's say I wanted it to be something like 4 inches. I could do that. I could type 4, enter, right? But another way of creating this geometry is I could also create a kind of a dynamic input of dimension, where I know the center is here, right? But if I want it to go all the way out to this object, I can snap to that object and click. And by doing that, it just generated that octagon so that it fit inside of that square, right? Regardless of what size this was, I don't have to know that, I can just create it.
Does it always go from one of the corners of the polygon, or is there a way that it goes off one of like the edges?
From this edge like this?
Yeah.
You know, that's a good question. I've always had it generate from a vertex.
Is there ever like a situation you think where that would matter? I guess you said you don't really use this.
Not very much. It would just be aesthetics, right? So if you're, like in this case, if I were trying to draw a stop sign because I had a project where, you know, the client wanted some custom stop sign and they wanted it to be an octagon, right? I would look at this and say, well, the stop sign, this edge is on top, right? And so instead of trying to figure out a way to draw this from the edge, I would just rotate it a little bit to get it the right direction. Yeah. All right. So we've created a few polygons, right? You can see it's very custom. I can create any type of polygon I want. So I click on polygon. Really the key to this is determining the number of sides, whether it's circumscribed or inscribed, which, you know, unless you have a clear definition, for me it doesn't really matter that much, right? And then executing it with a dimension. Executing it with a dimension you input, right? 2 foot, enter, or touching another object, snapping to another object and getting that kind of graphic dimension. Okay, now all of this geometry in here, let me say this, you can use any of the modification commands that we introduced last time to modify these pieces of geometry, right? So if I want to copy, if I want to move, if I want to rotate, if I want to offset, and anything we learn in the future, we're going to learn how to fillet and trim and scale and stretch and a lot of other things. You can perform any of those operations on any of this geometry that we create, okay? Any questions so far on any of these? Okay. Well, let's go to copying first then. So we'll start with copy, all right? Now, the idea behind I can say most of the modification commands, the idea behind it, or I guess the series of events that occur throughout the command, you're going to initiate the command, you're going to select objects, and you're going to enter a dimension and then execute it, right? So we have kind of the series of things that you do on every single one of these modification commands. Now in AutoCAD, right, which is different from Revit, Jake's going to have to get used to that, it doesn't really matter if you select the object first and then initiate the command, or if you initiate the command and then select the object, right? So you'll see me doing both. Sometimes I'll come over here, and if I wanted to, you know, copy this triangle, I will select it. I can select it by dragging a window over it, right? Either direction is fine. By clicking on it and picking it, right? I can select it any method, any way that's most comfortable for me. So you'll see me selecting, coming up here, typing copy, or sorry, clicking on copy. I could also type copy, right? I could also type CO, which is the shortcut for copy, okay? There's a few different ways you can initiate the command. So I can select, then I can initiate the command, enter. And what that does is AutoCAD says, hey, great, you have defined your selection set, you've initiated the command, now tell me, you know, how many you want to copy and how far apart they are, essentially, right? The copy command it's a continuing command, so it will continue to copy in one object, and it will continue the command until you tell it to stop, right? So it doesn't just do one and then stop, and you have to reinitiate the command and do it again, right? It just continues on. So I look down at my command line. What's the next thing I'm going to do? Specify a base point, okay? A base point is just a stationary point in space that will allow you to enter a dimension from it, right? So I click, I move my object in the direction I want to go, you know, to copy, click, 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 escape. That's a multiple copy, and that's the way that copy works. It's a multiple, you know, the command chains itself. It just keeps going until you say don't do it anymore. Now that was just a visual copy, so I click, 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 right? And there was no dimension associated with it. I'm going to grab my triangle. I'm going to come up here to copy, click. I'm going to click my base point on it, the object this time. And you think, well, what's better? Is it better to create a base point out here in space, or is it better to pick one on the object? Well, in this case, it doesn't really matter, right? But in other cases, it might, right? If I wanted to copy this triangle, click, right to the midpoint of this wall, click, it would make sense for me to pick the base point at that top vertex, right? Because I want to take this triangle from here directly to there. But if I were trying to create this pattern in space and I didn't really have anything I was snapping to, then it doesn't really matter where my base point is, right? Because it's not helping me place the object, it's just helping me copy it, essentially, right? So I select my object. I can select multiple things that are not connected at the same time. Copy, click, specify a base point, click, and then I pan over a little bit, click, 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 right? And I just click in space, generating my copied objects. Okay, escape, escape. Now what happens when I want to copy something at a specific distance, right? Not just graphically looking here, clicking away. Well, I'm going to do the same procedure. I'm going to select my object. I'm going to come up here to copy, click. I'm going to come down here to my, my object, click. I'm going to move it in the direction I want to go, moving my mouse in the direction that the object is going to be copied specifies a direction, right? I don't have to create an ordered pair for that. So if I move down, it's going to move down. If I go over to the left, it's going to go left. I can turn my ortho on and off, F8, right? Moves back and forth. And now I can type a dimension, 10 foot, enter. And it copies that over 10 feet. I can continue copying. I could do 20 foot, enter, right? 30 foot, enter. 40 foot, enter, okay? And the way that AutoCAD measures these copies is from the original object. So 10 foot from the original object, 20 foot from the original object, 30 foot from the original object, 40 foot from the original object, okay? This is something that's different in Revit as well. But if you wanted to copy something at a specific increment in AutoCAD, you're going to have to kind of in your mind do math and say, oh, what, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, right? And figure it out. Did that work for you this time, Emma? Yeah? Okay. Good, good. All right. Any questions on copy? All right. Good, good. So copy, move, they move, which is our next command. We'll just go over again. They function a lot in the same way, right? So we're going to select the object and then initiate the command, or we can initiate the command and then select the object, right? And then we're going to click a base point and specify a distance, right? Whether it's graphical or we have a specific dimension in mind, all right? So if I want to move an object, I can click on move, or I could type M, enter at the command line. I'm going to come down, select my object. When I'm done selecting, I hit enter. Click a base point, move in the direction I want to go, click again, right? Same operation as move, except instead of making, or as copy, except instead of making multiple, renditions of the object, it just moves the original, okay? Select the object, move, where is it? There it is, click a base point, move it up. I could also give a dimension, 6 foot, enter, right? Now the base point, again, the base point doesn't really matter unless you're trying to place the object somewhere, right? So if I'm just moving things about in space and it doesn't really matter where they land, then the base point doesn't matter, okay? I can click anywhere to establish a base point. But if I'm trying to move this object from, here, I want to take it from this top vertex, click, and I want to put it at the midpoint of this triangle, click, then it's helpful to pick the base point as that top point so that it directly aligns with where I'm moving it to, okay? I can move multiple things at one time, right? I can select all of these things. I can go up to move, click a base point, move them over, click, okay? I could come up here to my floor plan, select the whole thing, M for move, or click on the move icon, specify a base point, click, move in the direction I want to go, click. Okay. All right. Any questions on move so far? Not yet. Move will help you correct mistakes that you've made, right? So if you are working on drawing like the basketball court assignment, right, that we're working on for the next week. Let's see if I can find it here. What if you, accidentally draw something in the wrong spot, right? You're drawing the middle standard and you draw it, off to the side, and you think, oh great, I drew it the right size, but it's off to the side. Well, don't select it and delete it and redraw it, just move it, right? Or copy it over into the right spot and delete the original, right? There's a lot of things that you can modify. You don't have to delete them and start over, okay? All right, let's see, offset. If you remember offset here, offset will allow you to take an object and copy it a specific distance from the original object, okay? So in this instance, these circles have all been offset from this original circle, right? And I want to measure that distance. I don't know how far that offset is, but I want to recreate it over here. So I want to measure this distance, okay? And I'll remind you that when we measure things, we're going to use the distance command to measure things. So DI or DIST, we're going to type it in, hit enter. Click the first point to the second point you want to measure. That obviously showed me, right, a 1/2 inch. Click, click. But I can also come down here at my command line and see that I have a 1/2 inch, right? DIST, enter. Let's click the distance from, I'm zooming out a little bit. Let's measure this floor plan, all right? Click, panning over, click again, 10, and it says 10 foot, but 10 foot, right? I can hit enter, which initiates the command I just used, right, which was distance, and so I've just reinitiated distance. Click, click, 2 foot, 6 inches, right? And I said this before, but I'm constantly measuring things in AutoCAD, right, because I don't have a sense of how big things are. I can look at, maybe something like this, and it's filling my screen, and I'm thinking, gosh, that's gigantic, right? But then I go over here, and I think, oh, it's actually really small. But without any sort of dimension or something to give me a sense of how big these things are, right? This thing could still be like 4 miles across, even though it's tiny, and this thing could be 100 miles across, and it looks just bigger because proportionally it's bigger, right? So I'm constantly measuring things, making sure that my objects are dimensional and they're correct, and I'm drawing things off of those original things that are, the right size, okay? All right, let's see, sorry, just distance reminded me of something else and it's just gone out of my head. Let's see, anyway. Along the same topic of distance, right, you want to make sure that you're drawing things the right size. You want to make sure that you have your drawings in the right units, right? So if you type in units, UNITS, enter, okay? The correct units for this drawing are architectural, right? And my precision is 1/32. And my decimal degrees, my angle is decimal degrees, and my precision is, we'll do it to the second decimal point, right? But this is these are really good settings for your units, right? Architectural units are different than decimal units, right? We talked about that. So your very first assignment was in decimal units, and even though you input it with coordinates, it was, in the format of 1.00 or 3.04 or 2.63, right? So those are decimal units, and they're decimal inches, okay? Decimal inches are 12 times smaller than architectural units. So, if you drew something in decimals and you drew it all very nicely, it would be proportionally correct, but it would be proportionally 12 times smaller than an architectural drawing, right? So when architects and engineers or civil engineers interact, I call a civil engineer and I say, hey, I'm working on this project. Can you send me the CAD file for the site plan? They'll say, yeah, sure. They send over the site plan. Then before I can use it, I have to scale it up by a factor of 12 in order to make it the correct size to put architectural items on, okay? And that interaction goes on all the time, right? And so, make sure you're measuring things. Make sure that you are in the correct units when you're drawing things in AutoCAD, okay? Again, to get to units, you type in units, hit enter, right? Pretty easy. One thing I want to show you all that is pretty helpful is Google, of course, right? But if I don't remember a command or I forget something, right, I could come in here and I could type in how how do I set my units in AutoCAD? Follow these steps. Click the application. Oh, here's another way of going about it, right? Instead of typing units, click on the application button and then choose units from the drawing utility group. Okay, so I could do that, or I could, this one is from Autodesk.com, right, which is who produces the software. So this is pretty, the Autodesk website is usually pretty helpful. Let's see, click the application menu, utilities, drawing setup, click the units tab. Okay, that's the same way. Under the drawing units, select the desired drawing units. So they're not giving us a shortcut, but this will work as well, right? So I could go up to the application menu and I could go to the options. Oh, is that where it said to go that way? Utilities, drawing setup, let's see. I obviously never go this way. I don't see utilities. Do you? Oh, there it is. Units. There we go. Okay, so we could go that direction as well. Ooh, nice. They've got audit in here. See, I never go this route. Makes me go through 2 different menus to find something when I can just type units, right? But that's a good way of going about it, right? And honestly, whenever I have a problem in AutoCAD, very rarely can I not find it in a blog on the Autodesk website, right? And I can type in something like, my pen styles aren't working, or my layers are all dark and they won't print right. And somebody has had the exact same issue that I've had, and they, 10 people have commented on how they fixed it, right? So I even go that route more so than the help menu, honestly, these days. And I usually go that route before the help menu because I can type in a string of text that's in plain English and get an answer, right? I can say, how do I set the units? I don't have to go to the help menu and type in units, but I should have typed in project units, and so it didn't recognize it and couldn't find the topic or led me in the wrong direction, right? So Google is a really helpful tool in in helping you out. Have any of you ever gone to lynda.com? Heard of it? L-Y-N-D-A, lynda.com. So lynda.com is really helpful too, and a lot of times when I Google a solution for a problem, a lot of lynda.com solutions pop up. It's a paid subscription, but all of you, if you have does everybody have a library card these days? I still do. If you have a county library card, you can get free access to it. The county will allow you free access to lynda.com. And let's see. Salt Lake City County Library. We had somebody in this class that was a librarian like a year ago, and he showed me. If you type in, the county library for Utah, and you go to the research room, and then you go over to all premium resources. This is all the digital online content that you have available to you if you have a library card. And so honestly, I had a city library card, but I specifically went and got a county one so I could use this. But lynda.com is one of those. And super helpful. I don't have mine with me, but with lynda.com, you can type in plain English, strings of text as well and get answers like, what is the user coordinate system? And somebody out there has created a video on it. I think Lynda is more helpful than YouTube because YouTube has a ton of kind of very broad topics that may or may not be the same as what you're looking for, even though you're typing in the same thing as lynda.com. This is a little bit more targeted, so it's a good resource. All right, any questions so far? Okay. All right, so we've talked about move, we've talked about copy. I was getting to offset and I kind of got a little bit sidetracked with drawing units, right? We measure things, we make sure our units are in the right, they're in the right setting. I can look down here and see that my drawing is in architectural units. Here's a really great way of, making sure that visually you can see what units you're in. If this units, current drawing units button or icon is not showing up in your drawing, okay? You just click on these 3 little customization lines right there and turn on units. I see somebody over here has jumped to mirror because that floor plan is mirrored a couple of times. Good, good. It's good. All right, so let's offset, right? Offset is this little icon here. You can also type O at the command line. Again, offset will allow you to take one object, make a copy a specific distance away from that original object. And so if I want to offset this 12 inches, I'm going to click on offset, click, specify the offset distance, 1 foot, or I could have typed 12 inches, enter. Select the object to offset. Well, I'm going to click, and then so 12 inches is pretty big, right, compared to the other one next door. But I can offset to the outside in this instance, but if I tried to offset inside, it wouldn't let me because that radius is too large, you know, to offset inside, because that object is obviously smaller than that. So I offset to the outside, click, click, I offset to the outside, click, 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 right? And it will continue that 1 foot offset until I hit escape, right? Now, offset is really kind of a smart command. So if I wanted to enter, offset again, it remembers my last offset, 1 foot. If I change that to 6 inches, enter, click, I can offset to the inside. I can offset an offsetted object, right? Click, 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 click. I can zoom out here, click, click. And it very nicely gives me a preview and shows me my distance offset, click. I can do that with this object over here, click, 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 oop, right? I can do it with my triangle, click, 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 click. And as long as the offset is appropriate for offsetting in, it will offset in. Oh, too small for the inside. Okay. I can offset straight lines, obviously all of this type of geometry, anything that I can touch and the distance is appropriate, I can offset. Click, click. Okay. So for generating walls, offset actually really helps me create geometry in AutoCAD. And what I mean by that is if I were to draw this door swing right here, you know, I can create this. I can draw a line across here that's 3 feet long, right? And then I can draw this if I wanted to get that, you know, distance right there. I could also, another way of going about creating like a gap right here, I could take this little line, or actually it's a square. I probably have to draw a line in this instance. I could draw an extra line right here. Enter. 3 feet is 36 inches, enter. And I can offset an opening, right? So then that will allow me to draw some geometry like that. So you'll see me using offset. Maybe not so much in, like, I want to, you know, create an architectural element, but it helps me in geometry creation, right? So leaving gaps, determining how big things are, you'll see me using offset all the time for that. Okay. Any questions about offset? How do I what? Sorry?
How do you do the entranceway one?
I drew a line here. Okay, let me do it again. I went up and I created a line, and I just drew a line. Didn't really care how long it was. I just wanted to mark that first point. And then I used the offset command, offset, and I typed 3 feet, which is 36 inches, enter, click, click. And I offset that distance. And now that will allow me to draw the rest of the wall in place. Okay. Let's go over scale. We didn't do scale last time. Let's talk about it today. Especially considering I said that if you accidentally draw your drawings in decimals, not realizing it, right? And you get the whole thing complete and then you think, oh, I'm going to have to redraw this whole thing because I did it in decimals instead of architectural, which really potentially could happen to you, right? If you're not paying attention to your units. Let me show you how you can scale things up so that we can make them the right size, okay? Scale will allow you to take an object and scale it up by whatever scaling factor you want to scale it up by. So if you want something to be double the size, you can scale it by a factor of 2, right? If you want something to be 12 times its size, which would be the scale factor for decimal inches to architectural, you could scale it up by a factor of 12 using the scale command, okay? Oop, Where am I at here? Here we go. All right. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to get rid of a few things here. I'm going to select these and hit delete. I'm going to select these and hit delete, right? Get rid of a few more, delete. I'm going to clean up my area here. We'll leave these 3 triangles here. Scale is it's a really easy command to use, right? The scale command is this little icon right here. And let's see, it'll give us a little preview on how it actually functions, right? You see the little dashed line, that's how, if you wanted to scale this object by a factor of, make it 50% larger, that original object was the dotted lines and the new object is the red lines, right? So you're able to take the object that you'd already drawn and recreate it without having to redraw it, right? So I click on scale. I can also type SC, that's the shortcut command for scale, and hit enter. Scale works just like move, copy, where I can select the object first and then initiate the command, or I can initiate the command and then select, okay? So you'll see me doing both. I would probably say that I select the object first most of the time. I've gotten into that habit because Revit makes you select objects first most of the time, right? So I've kind of gotten into that habit. But I select my object, I click on scale, click, and it's going to say specify a base point. The base point for a scaling command is actually kind of important because it determines where that object ends up in model space. What I mean by that is if I pick the center of this object, click, you see how it grows from the center, right? If I grab this corner, you see how it grows from that corner, right? So, you could always move something back to where it needed to be, but if you scale it off the center, it's generally going to stay in the same place, right? It'll just grow outward. If you scale something from the corner, it's going to shoot off to the left or right side, right? If you scale something from the top point, it'll shoot down to the bottom, okay? So I'm going to click on scale. I'm going to select the object I want to scale. When I'm done selecting the object, it says continue to select objects. Well, I'm done doing that, so I hit enter. Now it says specify a base point. And again, the base point will determine where that object ends up in AutoCAD. So I'm going to pick this top point, click. And now it says specify a scale factor. So what I'm going to do is enter a numeric scale factor. So if I want something to be double the size, I'm going to scale it by 2. If I want it 50% larger, I'm going to type 1.50. If I want it half the size, I'm going to type half or 0.5, right? And so it'll just be whole numeric or decimal increments that will determine the scale factor. So I don't type anything like 50% or 150. It's going to be a numeric input like 1.5 or 2 or 2.5. So if I want this to be half the size, I'm going to type 0.5, enter, and it scales it to half the size. Okay. If I want to take this object and scale it up by 2 times, make it twice the size, I'm going to SC scale, enter, select my object, hit enter, pick my base point, click, and I could type 2, enter, and make it twice the size, right? Yep.
So when I did that, before I typed anything in, it made it like 500 times as big, just like as if it was an object snap. Like.
So what might have happened is you did this. So if you grab this, you type scale, enter. You grab this, enter, right? You clicked, and then if you accidentally just, if you start moving your mouse, it makes it extremely large, right? And I can't really, it's just giving me a preview, but the preview is very large. I can't really tell you why it goes so big or so small, right? But it starts to give you a preview. And if I move my mouse out, sometimes it makes it smaller. And if I move my mouse in, you see how it somewhat grows. But if I were to click right now without inputting a number, I'm doing a graphic scale. So if I click, it sets that scale to make it gigantic. Is that what happened with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of seemed like it was snapping. I don't know.
Well, what could have happened, let me undo that. SC scale, select, enter, click. If you happen to snap up here, right, click, it would scale it. I can't tell you what the scale factor is. It did snap, but I don't really think that snap has much of an effect on how large it got, really. Okay, so I'm going to do that. You enter. I could also type Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, and I'm undoing all of those scales that I just done, right? It's not going to really matter very much to us today, but when we get to drawing site plans, you're going to have to start drawing your site plans. You draw site plans in decimal format. As a civil engineer, you use decimals to do that. And that translates into architectural units with the 12, scale factor. So when I, draw the site plan and then I scale it up for use in an architectural office, I'm going to come up here to scale, click, select my objects. When I'm done selecting, I hit enter. Again, I'm really used to AutoCAD, so I know what comes next, but you not having used it very much, you're going to realize that you kind of get to a point where you're like, yes, I know I'm moving the right direction, and then you get stuck, right? You think, what's next? What's next? I don't know. So really get into the habit of looking down at the command line, or if you have dynamic input, right, it's going to say scale, specify a base point. So get used to looking for something that will tell you what to do next. So specify a base point, click. Okay. Specify a scale factor. All right, well, I'm just going to type 12. 12, enter, and that triangle was just scaled up by a factor of 12. Okay. What do you think the scale factor would be if I wanted to scale it back down? Would I just scaled it up?
1 over 12?
Exactly. Yep. So it's just as easy as if I scaled this up by 12 and I want to take it back to its original size, I scale it down by a factor of 1 over 12.
Could you enter it in as a fraction, or do you have to actually do the
Yes.
full value?
You could do both. So if I knew what 1/12 was in decimals, I would use decimals because I like typing in decimals better. Yep.
And so that's just how you switch between architectural and decimal?
Yes.
So
How you
if I have
convert.
the whole design in decimal and realize that I can just highlight everything and
Scale it up by 12.
scale it.
It's not best practices, right? You don't want to get in the habit of doing that, but if you make a mistake and accidentally do that, you can remedy it. Yeah.
So, would you first scale it up and then switch your drawing to art?
Yes. Yep. Yep. Because if you continue on a decimal, you'll just continue drawing it incorrectly. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anything on any of that so far? All right. I'm just going to take a quick break. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. And then I'm going to introduce the idea of layers. We'll have another probably about a half hour, and then we'll be done. So let me just be right back. One of those days, right?
No, I didn't. Started going into DSL and I'm like, okay, I get it, and just don't know how to get it. Yeah. I'll leave you back.
Isn't it possible to schedule to like budget?
I was like curious on what soda you got.
Did you get it?
No, I probably was chewing it.
It's like that's probably healthy. Oh, it's so healthy for you, right? But you know what? I've got an apple here, so that makes up for it.
Yeah, keep up that thinking.
I'll keep up that
It'll help your conscience.
Yeah, stop. What's the word I'm looking for? God, I had the apple, so.
Don't you just love those moments? It's like, you know what? I've been eating coffee for like a week. I'm gonna pick out today.
Yep.
No, I wish I cared them.
You're really annoying to listen to me eat this.
No, it's fine.
I can't even hear anything. What?
I can't even hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
No, me neither. My problem is with this boxing, we have to keep a journal of like what we, not only what exercise we do, but also what we eat and drink, and so I really don't want to put that on the paper.
Oh.
So
So like, I had a salad.
what you know, it's making you healthier and
I'm there, I'd write down Mountain Dew.
Well,
Ice
see,
cream.
the beautiful thing is, we only have to keep a journal for 30 days, and it doesn't have to be consecutive.
Oh, that's
We can just like pick our healthy things.
That's
She's
your
like,
healthy
the
days.
point of this is to make you more aware of what you put into your body. And I'm like, thank you, I already know I'm a bad child.
Right, right.
Yeah. It's
Sunny.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I feel like we'll get a special coffee from somewhere.
Yeah, no, she's making a fresh cup of coffee. If I was carrying her cup again, and
We have to see this one. I don't really drink coffee, but when I do, I drink it first. So.
I just get whatever's fast.
Right. I'm already tired enough. I don't have time for anything.
Being the one hand like you can. Oh.
Right. That's what push forward is.
So
It's like I was doing my homework, and it took me like a good half hour to go like just like slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have problems with redirecting treatment?
No, actually, I didn't.
I didn't, because I rushed through it. Like I
Well, and for me, like when they did the diagonals, I just switched to relative coordinate thing, where you do at, and then so that's I cheated a little bit on the diagonals, and I'm not gonna sit here and try to figure out the middle of that.
Well, I was trying to be smart and like do the first assignment while she was trying to show us like the material in the first place, so I was like guessing on all of it. So I wasn't that smart. I should have just waited.
Well, for me, I knew it's an easy assignment. I mean, I thought, I'm like, oh yeah, that's easy. I can do this, and so I put it off forever. And I'm really good at procrastinating. And so today I'm like, okay, I should probably do it. And the material is great.
I started trying to use the spasm.
So,
Like, okay, there's
I'm like, it's not that hard.
No.
It's not that hard.
Just do at and then
Yeah, that's what I did. I'm not gonna sit here and try to figure it out. You know, I'm really good at like when I see a problem, I'm like, okay, more often than not, it takes a long way to figure it out.
Yeah, me too.
I'm just started doing that. It's like I don't care as long as I get it done. Like, you know, you just do. No.
Yeah, I know.
I'm gonna do it.
You can't want to be able to get here and Okay. Everybody ready? Get a little bit. Maybe we should have a break every class. It's kind of nice, right? Okay. So, how many of you, maybe I asked this before, how many of you have done hand drafting before? Anybody? Tiny bit? Okay. All right. Does anybody know, or do you guys know what the term line weights means? Line weights? Okay. I guess I just assume, right? But then I realized that, anyway, people don't hand draft or anything like that anymore. So, okay. So the idea of line weights in architecture is that different things in drawings have different thicknesses of pens associated with them. Okay? And basically you could think of it in terms of you have we'll start here. Wide, heavy, medium, thin, fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm trying to remember if light is before fine. Thin, I think it's light. Light and fine. And then we have our pattern, like gray tone. Okay. And, wide might be something, when drawings are printed, wide might look very wide like that. Okay? And heavy, instead of being 3 thicknesses, it might be 2 thicknesses. A medium might be 1 thickness, right? And thin might be the edge of my pen, which is like that. And then light is just the lightest little, right? And fine is even, well, if I can get it with a marker, right, we'll just leave little dots in between. Fine might even be finer, right? And then pattern will be like any one of these, but this probably won't work very well, but it will be grayed out. So you'll have something that is like that. And the grayed out portion might be something like that, right? Oh, that worked, right? There we go. Might look like that. I'm really proud of myself. Maybe I should have done that on these, right? But we assign different architectural items these different heavy or lightnesses or heavinesses, okay? And we're going to assign them according to importance in drawings, okay? So things that are very wide are going to be elements like sight elements. Most importantly, like a ground line. Okay? And heavy are going to be things like walls, probably more like walls. Okay, doors or windows maybe. And there's a lot of architectural elements, right? We have doors and windows and furniture and floor finishes and ceiling grids and lights and equipment like projectors and a lot of stuff, right? So there's a lot of things that fall into these categories, but I'm just going to continue on with these. So doors and windows. Thin will be things like, let's see, doors, windows, let's do furniture. Light will be things like floor finishes. Fine will be things maybe like less important things that you are viewing, but maybe you just need to reference. Like on the floor, there might be a floor hatch, right? Maybe there's a tunnel below floor, and you just need to know it's there, but it's not really important in the drawing. So we'll just do equipment maybe. And patterns, those will be hatches, right? So the idea behind this is that this is assigning a graphic order to elements in drawings, right? And it's kind of, you could compare it to reading a book, right? We open the book and then we start on this page and we read from left to right, right? We go from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, right? And the text is so high and it goes to the margins, and you know, graphically when you open a book, you can, your eyes are trained to view it a certain way and to be able to read it, right? And drawings are the same way. So when a set of drawings is opened, the heaviest line is going to be the walls. And so the heaviest thing that you see is the walls, and you know those are the walls, right? And then you see the second heaviest, the heaviest are the walls. The second heaviest thing are doors and windows, right? So you look at it and you say, oh, these really dark things on the plans, oh, those are walls. And those things that, you know, they're represented by a symbol that means a door, right? But of course, they are also slightly lighter in pen weight than walls. So we look at it graphically and can say, oh, the heaviest outline, you know, that's the wall. And then the next, you know, heaviest, or that's less heavy, is going to be doors and windows. And then we have furniture, and you can graphically, visually be able to determine what things are in a set of drawings by the thickness of their pen weight, okay? Now, the reason that, you know, walls are heavy and things like floor finishes are light, number one, it's architectural importance, right? We want to see the things that, and walls, of course, define the architectural space. They're very important, right? They're structural, they define the space, they're very important, they have a heavy pen weight or a line weight, okay? Things that define the space but are maybe less important in terms of architecture are slightly lighter. So doors and windows, okay? Things that are less important are going to be things like furniture and floor finishes. They're there, but the important piece is the architecture, right? So these are kind of secondary to that envelope, right? Now, another thing that plays into that, so pen weights are they determine importance, but they're also determined somewhat by how a floor plan is cut, right? When you're looking at a floor plan, it is if you had taken the building and cut it horizontally and pulled the top off and you're looking down into it, right? So you see the walls, the doors, the windows, the floor finishes, the furniture, you know, you see the path out to the hallway, the stairs, the elevators, the bathrooms, all that stuff. But the way that we look at a floor plan is we cut the floor plan at a height of about 3 to 4 feet, right? So between 3 and 4 feet, that horizontal cut, the items that we touch in that cut are illustrated on a floor plan, right? So that's why when we see a floor plan, we're not seeing lights on it, right? Because a floor plan is cutting the floor plate at 3 to 4 feet and looking down, okay? The walls are the heaviest, windows and doors are next, furniture, floor finishes, it all grades down from there, okay? If we were to, you know, cut, like, what is that, maybe 6 feet, 7 feet, 7 feet, we would maybe see like this rail, this where we can hang stuff off of, right? So as you cut, you're seeing different things in the floor plans. With a ceiling plan, you're cutting, but you're looking up, right? So there's different rules as to where you cut the floor plate, and if you look down, if you look up, right? And then you have this other layer of, hey, we make things, you know, different pen weights so that visually we can tell what they are on the plans, okay? It's a really kind of fast introduction, right, to that. But let me show you what that actually means graphically when we print things, right? Let me show you what a set of drawings looks like. If I can find one. Here's a set of drawings. This was, so construction trades, they are building this, or it was built 2 years ago. How many of you are in construction trades? Yeah? Oh, I thought you were in interior design for some reason.
Well, technically it's cabinet making and furniture design.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, Boyd, you know Boyd Johnson then, probably?
Goffner.
What's that?
Goffner.
Boyd Johnson? Oh, okay. So he does, I didn't think he does framing, anyway, classes and stuff on that, but they built this house 2 years ago. Every year we design a new home, but this one was purchased from Wasatch Custom Homes. But you can see this, right? So we can see that things like the walls, this is the heaviest pen weight. This is very close to it, but it's slightly thinner. The windowsill is a lot thinner, right? There aren't very many pen weights here, but The door swing is even lighter than the door panel, right? It's just an indication of it. They don't have very many pen weights here. But do you see how there's a difference in all the heaviness and the lightness of the pen weights, right? And then this gray tone is going to be like that gray tone hatch, right? So that's what I meant with the gray tone hatch. But you're going to see a difference in pen weights throughout a set of drawings. This is probably not the best example I could have chosen. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see whose project this is. Ah, here's a good project. Whose is this? Oh, okay. Right? So the walls are very thick. We have the gray tone. And we have the windows and the doors. They're the same pen weight, right? And then we come into here and we have, you know, millwork, and we have plumbing fixtures. I'm trying to find something a little lighter. Floor finishes are even lighter. They're kind of a gray tone in this one, right? Plumbing fixtures are a lot lighter than the walls. So doors, windows, kind of the same. Fireplace, lighter than the stairs and also the walls, right? So it's going to be of lesser architectural importance than, you know, the items around it. But you guys kind of get the idea, right? When I look at this drawing, immediately, if this were printed out, I could very much tell where the walls were, right? And that makes sense because when you're building it, you want to know where the structure is, right? We need to know where the walls are. We need to know where the doors and windows are. And then after that, all the other things that, you know, if we accidentally miss the floor finish, the building's not going to fall down, right? Somebody might not be very happy, but it's, you know, it is secondary to these other important items, okay? So somehow in AutoCAD we have to represent that, right? We have to be able to assign a very thick pen weight to walls, and we have to be able to assign a very thin pen weight to floor finishes, okay? And that is how we're going to use what's called layers in AutoCAD. That's kind of the most important function of layers in AutoCAD, is to assign that pen thickness to items, okay? The second most important thing having to do with layers in AutoCAD is organization, right? We organize architectural elements according to layer in AutoCAD. And that makes sense because all of the doors are generally going to be the same, you know, printed pen weight, and it makes sense to put them all in the same layer for organization, right? So if we want to turn every other layer off and just look at doors, all the doors are on the same layer, we can look at them at the same time, okay? So let's look at AutoCAD and look at layers. I'm going to open up another file, open. Okay. And I'm going to go to this PC and then to CAD Common, Arch, 1310, and Drawings, and AIA Layers. Everybody able to find that one? Okay. So usually by default when you create a brand new drawing, you're not going to have any layer association with anything in your drawing, right? So if you go to draw something, it's going to be a white line. It's going to be blank, okay? I'm going to flip back over to this drawing I just had open. What you're seeing here with all of these colors, those are layer associations, right? And the way that we determine, the way that we determine a pen weight in AutoCAD is according to layers, right? Layers determine the pen weight. And the pen weight, the thickness of the line when it's printed, is determined by the color. Okay, so we have what's called a color-dependent line weight system in AutoCAD, all right? So what that means, if you guys want to open up your booklet here, I'm going to go and find it. Assignments. Let's see, course manual, download it. I probably have it downloaded about 90 times on this computer. Shown folder, there we go. Okay, the very last page of this book, I believe, I'm going to go all the way to the, nope, second to last. Oop, nope, third to last. Where is it? It's back here somewhere. There it is, right there. Okay, it's this page right here. Okay. This is how all of our colors and line weights are associated in AutoCAD, okay? So let's look at this. We're going to go over this again on Monday as well, all right? So don't get too panicked if it doesn't quite make sense. We'll finish up layers and then how we're going to appropriately name them on Monday, okay? But essentially what this means is that color number 1, so layer number 1, pen number 1, and those terms are interchangeable. So you'll hear things like use color number 1 with layer number 1, or use the pen number 1, right? It's kind of saying the same thing, just different terms, right? It means that you want this certain thickness associated with this layer or item, okay? But pen number 1 is the thickest pen. Pen number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? Those are how they grade down in our system, in our lab here in AutoCAD, okay? And so you're thinking, well, what does color number 1 mean and what does pen number 1 mean, right? Well, let's go back to AutoCAD here. And I'm still in this file here, all right? I'm going to flip over to AIA layers. I'm going to go to this layer properties dialog box here. So I have my tool palette, my layer tool palette under the home tab. And if I click on layer properties, click, okay, my layer dialog box pops up here, all right? And this is where all of my layers are going to live, and this is where they're all going to be organized, okay? Let me just show you, I think what we'll get to today, let me just stop for a second. What we're going to get to today is how to create a new layer, how to name a new layer, how to change the color of a new layer, and then on Monday we'll talk about how to associate items with layers and how to name layers professionally, right? So we'll kind of finish this up on Monday. But essentially, this is where you're going to create brand new layers, right? We have a bunch of icons up here at the top. We have a create new layer icon, click, and it creates a new layer. And I can give it a name, like wall, enter, okay? I have freeze layer and viewport. We're not going to worry about that. We have delete layers. So if I have a layer that I don't like and I want to delete it, I can delete it here, okay? And then I have set a current layer. A current layer is the layer that you're drawing currently with, okay? And again, we'll talk more about this. When you open up a layer dialog box in a brand new drawing, there will be 2 layers that are in there by default. Layer 0, which is something that we'll talk about when we get to blocks. We're not really going to use it right now. It's not a layer that's suitable for drawing except for one specific purpose later on. And then we have def points. Def points is also a default layer here, and it's used for a specific purpose, and it's not a layer that generally you want to be drawing with, okay? So we're going to create our own layers, we're going to name them, and then we're going to give a color association, to them. That color association assigns a pen weight to that layer, okay? And then those layers that you use to draw will have pen weights associated with them, right? It's kind of complicated to say, but it's actually a fairly easy topic, okay? So to create a new layer, I click here, new layer, and I name this window. Whoops, window, right there, enter, okay? I'm going to go back to my wall layer, click on it one time, and I'm going to come over here to this color column here. Right now it says white, but if I click on the white, and all of these things that I'm showing you right now apply to any layer. If I click on white, click, this select color dialog box pops up, okay? Now the colors that we're going to be using for our layers are located here, obviously. The colors that we want to use are these index colors, and there's 9 of them here, and also these gray tones down here. So really when you're choosing colors for layers, I want you to stay down here on these index colors, okay? It's really tempting to want to venture up here because there's a lot more colors, right? But as far as, kind of when you're working in an office professionally, I would say that probably most of the offices I've worked at, they stay down here in these index colors. And they stay down here in these index colors not because you can't use these colors up here, because you can, right? But everybody knows in an office that color number 1 is red and it's right there, right? And they know what color number 1 means. Color number 1 is red, and red is heavy, right? Color number 2 is yellow, and it's medium, right? And they all kind of go down, and everybody knows that, okay? They may not know that color number 62, right? That may also be the same line weight as color, red color number 1. But people don't inherently know what all of these pen weights are associated with, right? And so it's a safe bet to say, well, we all know what color number 1 is. Make that layer red, make it color number 1. We know it's a thick pen weight. But you're like, hey, but I really like color number, what is that? 132. And they're like, what does 132 mean? What color is even that? You know, what is it? And the idea makes sense to them. They know that maybe it's a thick or thin pen weight. And if you tell them, oh, it's the same as number 1, they'll say, oh, well, then just use number 1, right? So in order to kind of maintain your standards, it's best just to kind of stay down here, right? Unless you're otherwise told to. But these are our colors. Color number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then our gray tones, 250 through 254. Okay? So if I want a thick line, right, and I'm on my wall layer, and I want a thick line to associate with my wall layer, I'm going to click on this index color number 1. Click, and I'm going to hit OK. That red color is associated with my wall layer now. All right. Does that make sense so far? Okay. One thing, so you're thinking, well, great, now I want to draw with that layer because I want to create a bunch of walls. I want them to be red, right? I want them to be thick. In order for you to draw with that layer, before you do anything, you need to make it current. The current layer has a check mark next to it, and right now 0 is a current layer. So to make the wall layer current, I'm going to click on that little layer paper right there, okay, and make that wall layer current. I'm going to close out of this layer dialog box. And you'll notice that in this little drop down right here, wall layer is showing. The layer that is showing right here is the current layer, and if I go to create some geometry like a line, that will be red. Okay? If I change this to something I shouldn't be drawing on, well, there's window, which is white. If I click on if I click on window, now when I go to draw a line, it is white. I flip back to wall, right? Line, and all of my walls will be red. Okay. The way that layers work is we have a lot of visibility settings that we can manipulate, which we'll continue to talk about. But the general principle behind layers is that layers are, you could compare them to, you could compare them to transparent pieces of paper, you know, or transparent plastic sheets where I have my wall layer and it's transparent. When I draw on it, I draw red lines, right? But you know, here's my wall layer and it's transparent. I draw my walls, right? And then I go to the door layer and I create all my doors, right? And it's yellow. And I create all of my furniture and it's magenta, right? All of these layers are transparent, and when I look at them on AutoCAD, I can look down, I can see all of them together, right? So it's as if I'm just stacking these transparent pieces of paper one on the other, and I'm viewing all of them at the same time, right? But they're all separate and they can be turned on and off separately, and they all have different pen weights associated with them, okay? So for example, let's create a few more layers here. I'm going to click on layer properties. I'm going to create a few more layers, right? For now, we're just going to name them very simply by architectural element. Door, window, right? So click on new layer. We'll call this door, enter. And I'm going to click on another new layer, and we'll call it furniture, enter, right? And I'm creating new layers, and maybe you're noticing that, I'm going to do that. When I create a new layer, they're red, right? So maybe you're wondering, why aren't they white like the default layers were, right? Well, when you create one layer and you set some associations with it, and then you create another new layer right after doing that, it's going to copy the settings from the previous layer, okay? So that's why all of these are red. But I can click on door, and I can change that one from red to green, whatever, right? I'm just kind of making these up at this point. But furniture, I can make that one magenta, okay? Now, if you look in your, in fact, let me pull it up on screen. If you look in your book here, right, you may not have a sense for what the different colors mean yet, right? But I know that color number 1, pen number 1 is very thick. And when it prints out, it's this thick. But pen number 1, color number 1 is red in my AutoCAD system, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So it looks like this in AutoCAD, but when I print it on a piece of paper, it's going to look like that, okay? And color number 6 right here is going to be this thin when it's printed out on a piece of paper, but in AutoCAD, right? Pen number 6 is magenta, right? You'll get a sense for these very quickly, but until then, you know, when you start working for an office, you'll get one of these line weight charts. They'll give it to you, you'll print it out, you'll put it by your desk, and you'll just kind of look at it, you know, to determine what pen weights you want until you get familiar with them, right? But essentially, these are going to be our pen weights. Now, one thing that you're going to need to know down here at the bottom of this line weight chart, okay, pen number 1, which is red, which prints out that certain thickness that we can see at the top, right, is 0.7 millimeters. So when it actually prints out, it prints out at 0.7 millimeters, which correlates to hand drafting, right? Because you have different thicknesses of leads that you use to hand draft with, right? 0.7 is very thick, and then the, you know, 0.15 millimeters is going to be very thin. So when you're hand drafting, you have 6 or 7 pencils on your desk, and when you need a certain line weight, you take out a pencil, you draw lines with it. When you're done with it, you put it away, you take out another one, right? In AutoCAD, when you need different thicknesses of lines, you change the layer, right? Depending on what you need to be showing on the screen, okay? But I can't remember if it's a quiz question or if it's just in your assignment. Anyway, you're going to be asked to create some layers, and it will say, hey, create a layer that's called this, and it's 0.7 millimeters. And you're going to get confused and think, 0.7 millimeters, I thought my layers were supposed to be colored, red, yellow, green, right? Well, they are, but 0.7 millimeters corresponds to pen number 1, and pen number 1 is red, right? So it's kind of maybe a way to connect your thinking to the different colors, pen weights, and numbers, okay? Okay. So layers, bless you. Layers allow you to assign pen weights to different architectural items, right, according to importance. Layers also allow you to organize different architectural elements because similar architectural elements go on similar layers. So all the doors go on a layer, all the windows go on a different layer, all of the walls go on the wall layer, right? So you separate things out according to architectural elements, okay? Layers also allow you to control visibility of things on your screen. So for example, if I want to only be able to see my doors, not anything, or let's say the walls, because I actually have some, sorry guys, this drawing's not complete. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's see what we have here. See, they've got a bunch of layers. Okay. Let me just show you something here. We'll get into how this all functions on Monday, but I'm just illustrating how it all sort of works today. Visibility is also controlled through layers. So for example, you know, I click on this line, and it shows me that it's on a wall layer, and this wall layer up here corresponds to this wall layer here, right there, that's red, right? There's a little sunshine right here. If I click on that sunshine, it turns into a snowflake, freeze and thaw. And you see visually I can turn those items on and off on my screen, right? The actual terminology for what I'm doing right now is called freezing and thawing, but you will hear everybody say, turn that on, turn that off, right? And I want to make that clarification because there is an actual on-off visibility setting in the layer dialog box that you're not going to use, okay? So in industry, if anybody ever says, hey, will you turn that layer on or turn it off, it doesn't mean use the actual on-off function. It means freeze or thaw it, okay? So we have our freeze and thaw, which visually turns them off. So when they're visually turned off, they cannot be printed, they cannot be viewed, they can't be edited, right? And you also cannot draw on that layer. So if I tried to come up here and change my layer to walls, AutoCAD would say, hey, you can't do that because that layer is turned off, right? You need to turn it back on in order for you to be able to draw on it, okay? All right, let me turn that back on real quick. Any questions about layers so far? Okay. I think I might stop there for today. I think that's quite a bit of information, right? I'm going to stop there, and I'm not going to give another homework assignment yet. Why don't you guys just work on the couple that you have so far. And then on Monday, we'll finish talking about layers, how they work, how we assign them, how we name them, right? And then you'll get a layers assignment for next week, okay?